All right, we'll get the webinar underway. Good morning, everybody. This is Jeff Spring at the Department of Commerce in Olympia, and welcome to the October edition of the CHG Lead Grantee webinar. This is the monthly webinar that Commerce has been hosting that is your venue for peer-to-peer communication with your fellow CHG lead grantees across the state. And if you have not entered your audio pin, I encourage you to do that so that if you have a question of our panelists, I can unmute you and you can actually address the entire audience with your question. If you don't want to do that, feel free to chat me or ask questions. I'll be checking both of those periodically throughout the webinar. So today we have, our topic for today is diversion, and as you know, this is a really critical topic for everybody doing homeless housing assistance. And I have been able to get our friends Rick Evans in Walla Walla to present for the first half hour, and then Sharon Stadelman and Jackie Thompson from Catholic Community Services in Spokane will take over at 11:30. So at this stage of the game, I want to make Rick the presenter. And Rick, it looks like your audio pin has not been entered. Did you call in again and not?
I should be there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. You'll have to click on Show My Screen, and the audience can now see your presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff, and good morning, everybody. My name is Rick Evans. I'm the Coordinated Entry System Manager for Walla Walla County's system called Pathways Home. So today we're going to talk a bit about prevention and diversion. Now, in getting ready for this presentation, I went through the vast reaches of the internet to find clear definitions of each word because I found that the words could sometimes be interchangeable. The very quick breakdown of the two terms that I believe captures the difference as well is that prevention stops a household from becoming homeless, while diversion prevents a homeless household from entering into the homelessness system. Starting with prevention, the most common prevention tactic that I've seen is to pay someone's 3-day pay or vacate notice. If their rent is paid, there's really no longer a threat of them losing their housing. Pretty simple. However, that can get very expensive from an agency for an agency to administer, so alternative options must be found whenever possible. An example of those alternative options would be negotiating a repayment agreement between the landlord and the tenant. I had a client who was in danger of being evicted, but their situation was going to improve drastically in very short order, about a week. My first question for the client was, how much would you be able to put towards your rent today? It was about 40% of what was owed, so they were going to definitely need some assistance to get over the finish line and prevent their eviction. I then asked, with your situation improving next week, if the landlord was willing to take some money now and carry over the rest for next month, would you be able to do that? Their response was great. I would love to be able to do that, but I don't think the landlord would be open to it. I proceeded to ask if I could try, and she said I could. So the landlord was more than happy to oblige if he would get some of his money now, avoid having to go through the cost and time of having an empty unit, and he would get the full amount owed by next month. While this example was only for 1 month, a repayment agreement can be used for multiple months as well. If someone has a loss of income where they won't be able to pay their rent, some landlords can be open to working out an arrangement that can span a few months and give the client time to catch up. Now, it doesn't always work. Some landlords won't be willing to make exceptions and will be very strict. However, it's a tool you can attempt when you are out of options for a client who is at risk of losing their housing. For diversion I found is a bit tougher, simply because of the element of time. If someone is homeless, time is very much of the essence, since the external threats of being on the street are really brought to bear in that situation. In my experience, a very real opportunity that is present in more clients than you might think is rebuilding relationships with family and friends. There have been numerous individuals who have come to me through coordinated entry that tell me that they are staying in their car, on a bench, or something along those lines. When I dig a little deeper and attempt to find the root cause and possible solutions, I find that if they are on the young side, somewhere like early to mid-20s, the problem stems from something to do with something at home, maybe related to their parent. it's truly amazing what a family dispute can lead to. Offering to mediate or give some advice to the client regarding the fractured relationship has proven to be very effective in returning them to a stable housing situation where they can have time to address any other issues that are leading them to where they were headed. An example that comes to mind is an individual who was all set to start school at Walla Walla University. He had university housing and was raring to go until he found out he was going to be unable to attend school and not able to stay in the housing that he already planned to stay at. Now, the client had already visited with me and was prepared to enter the local shelter. In my attempts to find more information, I found that he had no real options in Walla Walla for the immediate future in terms of housing or employment. So we talked about family and found out that mom and dad lived in Yakima, which is about 3 hours away from Walla Walla. I asked how he got along with his parents. He said they got along, but he wasn't eager to return home. He was not very independent or attempting to be very independent and wasn't very eager to engage in that. I suggested a conversation whereas it wouldn't be so much returning home to stay, it would be returning home temporarily while he got everything figured out. So being able to stay someplace else in the meantime is really going to protect them. So he agreed, and I'm happy to report now that he is staying with mom and dad, so he won't be in the elements or in the shelter this winter. So he was able to take some of that advice, and he'll be able to save some money from some other resources and sort of regroup and go give the college another try either here or elsewhere in another town. I want to say a little bit about building rapport. It's very tough, if not impossible, to execute any of these activities without building rapport and gaining trust with the client. One of the ways that I found to let them talk is to let them talk as much as they want, within reason. The very first thing I ask any client once we've sat down and done introductions is, so what brings you in today? This lets the person know that I want to hear about their troubles. When they start talking about the situation and everything that led to it, I gain valuable information that can help me with alternative ways of helping them, all the while they're opening up a bit and beginning to feel more comfortable. I'll also ask open-ended questions as they go along. Something as simple as why, or how did that happen? This makes sure that they open up and give me more than yes or no answers. Now, again, one of those things that doesn't always work. Some folks are very closed and don't want to open up, but it's our job as someone working with them at the beginning to try, to open that up, to try and see what else is there, because every avenue that you look for, every avenue that you gain from your interactions with them really does improve the options that are available to you for a diversion. I'll do this every time I have a new client, long before I start the actual assessment piece. While everyone has their own way of building that rapport, this is what's worked for me. So in summary, the obvious answer isn't always the best one. It's always worth considering every available option for each client you meet with. If you decide on a plan and it doesn't work for whatever reason, there could be more options available. It's just a matter of knowing what those options are. Building rapport is essential to success with prevention and diversion. The client must trust that you have their best interests at heart, or it's very tough to be a successful advocate for them. Finally, think outside the box as often as possible. You find lots of new and exciting ideas out there. And with that, I will open it up to any questions.
Great, Rick. Thank you so much. I'm wondering if you had any exposure to working with other systems of care, maybe connecting clients to DSHS, connecting to local food banks. Did you have any experiences where you actually made connections between people seeking housing assistance and those other kinds of systems?
Absolutely. One of the things that I think the toughest person or family that can come in to see me is someone who comes in and are on the street and have no resources, no money, no income, no Social Security, no anything. So part of what I would do in attempts to assist them is make referrals to the places to start that income. If it's talking to DSHS, if it's talking to the Social Security Department, if it's getting it over to WorkSource, to assist with getting a resume put together to go out and search for work. All of those resources are brought to bear fairly regularly.
So have you been in this role long enough to have seen what some of the longer-term outcomes look like from your efforts?
I have seen enough to know that sometimes they do fall. For whatever reason, it doesn't always get there at the end. But I've also seen some that absolutely do. The person I spoke about who's going over to Yakima for a short time is staying in consistent contact with me. He says and he's incredibly enthused about what's coming next. He hasn't decided where he's going to go to school just yet, but he's moving in the right direction. So being able to keep tabs is something we strive to do. Again, not something we can always do, but more times than not, we're able to stay in touch.
Great. So I want to extend an invitation once again to our attendees on the webinar to enter your audio pin. You can raise your hand on your GoToWebinar dashboard if you have a question, and you can either I can unmute you and you can ask the question to the entire audience, or you can also type the question in if you have any, or comments, or certainly open to comments from other folks that have other ideas about diversion. This is safe to say, a relatively new kind of intervention, and we're deep into the exploration phase across the state. So there's no one right answer to this particular intervention, and at this point we're just seeking to get all the ideas that are in the universe kind of on the table for everyone to see. So Sharon and Jackie, did you have anything that the two of you would like to add to that? And maybe this is a way to segue into your presentation at this time. Anything that you'd like to add?
No, I think Rick did a great job.
Are you ready for me to make you the presenter and share with the attendees your presentation?
Sure.
Okay. So you'll need to click on Show My Screen. Great. Okay, we can see you. Take it away.
Well, thank you for having us. We're excited about being able to present what we're doing for diversion services. It's a brand new funded model that we've been doing here in Spokane since January. So it's super exciting and really such an innovative opportunity for us to be able to collaborate with families and with singles in this regard. So we'll jump into the first slide here and move on to kind of what diversion means for us.
Great.
So as part of our continuum, diversion is a critical component as part of our coordinated assessment process for both singles and families here in Spokane. It is a frontline service that we offer for those households that come in. It really partners with those households no matter what their circumstances are, really looking at their housing crisis and being able to collaboratively problem solve and work with them to find solutions to what the housing crisis might entail for them. And like I said, we serve both singles and families in our community. I'm going to let Jackie jump in and talk about kind of the process that we offer here locally.
Yeah. Okay, so kind of the broader idea, as Rick hit on as well, is just exactly what we're talking about. You know, what is diversion and what do we see it wanting to be for case management services? So we see diversion as creative problem solving, and we try to outline, even though we have a small pot of money to use, that it is not a financial assistance type program. It's really exactly like Rick was talking about, triaging all other resources to kind of look into what we can access before ever moving into the financial assistance that we can provide. So definitely the philosophy is the same as Rick. So we talk about how we want to divert families from the homeless arena so that everybody in kind of the coordinated entry system are and have looked at all of the resources to know that that is the last resort to get into that coordinated entry system. And how we've done that is we've made it hand in hand part of our coordinated entry process and actually made it this very start of our coordinated entry process. So each one of our case managers, whether they are specific in diversion or specific in coordinated entry and assessment, have been cross-trained so that it is a diversion first model. So when a household comes in looking for services, we don't have to say because we're one thing or another, we're both. So we don't have to say, oh, I'm sorry, you're over income, or I'm sorry, you're not meeting these homeless definitions, that we can't serve you. Diversion is amazing in that way because we don't have to meet all those definitions. We can serve anyone, and we do. We serve singles and families with diversion. So when somebody comes in, it's not this cookie cutter approach that says, you know, we can only do this because our grant says we can only do this. It's really broad, which is what I love about diversion. So it's asking the household specific questions still of what are you looking for? What can we try and help you with today? Or what can we try and connect you with today? Because as we see as providers, you know, considered experts in this, we still don't even know all of the resources that are out there. So thinking of a household that's homeless, trying to learn those resources, that's just an incredibly hard task to do. So we try to connect them with that. And truly our coordinated entry is diversion. Diversion is coordinated entry is how we see our process going. When we talk about the actual length of time and kind of the ins and outs of our case management, we try to keep case management services approximately 1 month, just because when it's attached to our coordinated entry system, we have walk-in hours, so we're getting more people every single day into the need of having case management. So we try to keep it as fluid as possible, as we see all the time. Sometimes households just need us to come in and talk to a landlord and really smooth things out, and then they're exiting. We're really just seeing it as the immediate crisis. How can we try and help that? Because we also tell all households that they can come back through at any point in time. So if we have met that immediate crisis and given them resources to try and be sustainable, and next time they come back through, if that needs to happen, it's always a possibility. So really trying to see that immediate need, get that taken care of, and then if they need to come back through, they absolutely can. We do have limited financial assistance, but we absolutely make that a last resort. We are really forming case management around the idea that there is no money. Because we get into these programs such as we have rapid rehousing as well, that is really set in its case management approach, because each thing has its set thing that it does. You come in for your intake, we do a housing search, we get you housed, and here's how long we're helping for. When you erase all of that and say, here's a problem or an issue, I'm having trouble with my landlord, they're trying to kick me out, or whatever it is, when you don't have that narrow lens, it becomes this huge idea of, okay, well, what can we do? And then the financial assistance piece is really that is super creative as well, to say, of all other resources been accessed, yes, okay, great, and then we still find out that there's this small little piece that if we paid $50 for the storage fee, we've really figured out that that would make the family successful and everything else is taken care of, then we'll access that pot, but only then will we do that. And we really see very few payments going through.
And what we've seen that works really well for us is helping families really identify their own intrinsic strengths and values and resources that are out there. There's so often the households that we see come through our program are just in that crisis mode, as I'm sure you all experience as well, and really helping them to be able to work through that situation that's occurring and be able to break down the scenario and offer up these ideas of resources that possibly they hadn't even ever thought of before, and really being that calming presence and that partner with them through that crisis, and providing that support to really look at, oh my goodness, I have this family member that I maybe can stay with them for a couple nights, or I have this other resource that I never even thought about because maybe I haven't talked to that person in a few weeks or a few years. So really using that collaborative and creative conversation with those households to truly look at those resources and provide options for that has been just an amazing outcome that we've seen as part of this program. And something that the households have really identified as being so impactful in that relationship of providing diversion services. Another huge component that has worked really well for us, and it helps that we also manage our the rapid rehousing program here for families, is having a lot of pre-existing landlord relationships. So we have many landlords that we work with across the years that we've built relationships with and that we can call and talk to about it, especially if we have a family or a household that's trying to get into a new unit as part of that diversion, really being able to have that relationship built with those landlords that is so impactful to being able to get a household into a new unit or be able to help that household sustain their current unit. Because that's a lot of the problem solving and partnerships that we do diversion too, is really helping to be that landlord liaison and that mitigator in that housing crisis that they might be experiencing in their current unit. So having those pre-existing relationships has been so huge to help this diversion program be successful. Another really huge thing that we had done as part of looking at how we started this diversion program was just knowing what's out there. We're very lucky in Spokane. We are such a service-rich community that was a huge piece that we did on the front end. When we got this grant, we're like, we are going to get out there and know what programs are available, what resources are already an option for households, and making sure that we're not reinventing what we're doing. That's the biggest thing we do with diversion, is really being that resource expert. What's out there? What can we connect households with? How can we be that expert for them? Because of that crisis they're in, a lot of times they're not, those resources aren't even something they're thinking about in that moment. So truly being that expert in that role has had such a huge impact, and it's created this great new collaborative future partnership with these resources. We've made a dozen of resources that we never had before, connections and partnerships that we never were utilizing previous to diversion, that we now absolutely are strategically partnering with to be able to say, good, you can pay this little portion, we can do our piece, you're doing this piece, are we working with the same families, what's going on in each of our programs, how can we collaborate? So that has been such a critical component of diversion as well.
Yeah. So, kind of the things that we found successful to add on to that is when you talk about getting those relationships with landlords, it can be a hard task, but really just knowing that, in the grand scheme of things, not all landlords are bad and not all tenants are bad, but do we see unfortunate situations happen on both ends? Yes. So we try to always own up to that. Yes, there can be some bad things happening, and we just educate both sides. On the landlord side, you might have brand new landlords that really just don't know the landlord-tenant laws, and you can present it in a way that's not really harsh or telling them you're going to take them to court. It's simply, just so you know, if you don't do a walkthrough with the household, it's kind of, it's their right to just get that whole deposit back, but let's try to triage that. So really just educating them in a really kind way, because they might be so new, is a huge thing that we do as well. So to talk about the biggest challenges is always going to be the same for nonprofit and grant world. It's just when you talk about how much need there is in any community, you realize that when you do these kind of grants that can have people access it without these restrictions of definitions and all that kind of stuff, you realize how much need is out there. So really, the challenges that we see hugely is kind of this scope of prevention used to be the go-to resource that we don't have in our community anymore. So it used to be landlords giving households, and not even in a necessarily bad way or that they're going to go to court with it, but like a 3-day pay or vacate so that they could access services for prevention funds. So we're trying to reframe that framework and people's mindsets on services, because we're not even looking at money services, we're looking at case management services, which is a huge service when you really, really think about it. So we're reframing everybody's mind frames to say, let's get proactive about that. Our prevention strategy is to be proactive, not 3-day pay or vacates that landlords are giving. We are going out and then going to landlord association meetings and saying, please don't let your households get to that point. Call us and let us see what we can do to help come in when households are having trouble with rent. Because of course, when we're moving into the realm of the idea that households have all this debt and all this kind of stuff, it's so hard to pile that on a household and pile it on case managers and try to get creative about those solutions. So we are going out to the community as a whole saying, there is no more prevention services. That's unfortunate, yes, but here's the amazing thing that we can do. We don't have to have 3-day pay or vacates. Let's come in early, let's come in often, and let's really find out beforehand, when we have time to work on this stuff, to find job resources, to find out what needs to happen for this household to make them successful. So that's a challenge and kind of a great thing in that end of reframing people's mindsets. And it's difficult for sure, but it is happening. So that's a good thing and a challenge we've seen. The thing that we're always going to see is high caseloads. With it being completely embedded in our coordinated entry, which we have 4 days a week for about 4 or 5 hours a day, walk-in hours, we see households coming in every day looking for this type of resource. So we're still working on that, still trying to figure out with the small amount of assistance that we have, how do we triage families and all that kind of stuff. But currently how we're looking at it is, you know, we are meeting that immediate need. We are seeing and meeting with households that day to try and figure out a resource for them that day. And then we're looking at stability, you know, in the grand scheme of things in the long run, but we're really trying to make that case management much more fluid. And we're still working on that because we are seeing so much need for this type of resource.
Now, as you can see by this next slide, we look at our outcomes. So this is as of August of this year. We've served over 225, or we served 225 households and starting from January to August, I should say. And 200 of those had successfully been diverted from entering the homeless program. So it was an 89% success rate. So that's we're pretty proud of that so far. The next kind of little mini slides on here really talk about the different types of services that were offered as part of that service delivery. So we can see we've done some advocacy, budgeting, bus passes, landlord mediation. It has a whole list there of different services that we offered as part of that diversion case management. And then the right-hand slide talks about really the specific types of connections that we made as well based upon those same types of services. So it's really just a different way of looking at all the possible options. So our HMIS team has been really amazing about letting us just keep adding in or tweaking the different services that we offer as part of what we track at HMIS. So getting it as fine-tuned as we need to is really our goal as well, to make sure that we're really capturing exactly what kind of services we offer so we can clearly track like the level of need that's been out there based on the households that we've seen, and really being able to target looking at the bigger picture of what kind of advocacy has been part of the diversion program.
Yep. And then, of course, we put together a little flyer that we hand out. I take them to the landlord association meetings. I take them and we put them in our rapid rehousing packets to give to landlords when they get housed, to say, of course, if there's any trouble, please call us. Let us know what's going on. We've given them to the emergency shelters in town. We've tried to get this out everywhere because diversion is so great that it doesn't have to meet all these specific definitions to qualify for this program. It's really that idea of how do we try and get ahead of the game to prevent people and try and either keep them in their current housing situation, or if they do need to get out of that current housing situation into another, how do we make that a much easier, much less traumatizing situation for families, you know, with minors in their care and all that kind of stuff that can happen from there. And any questions?
As a matter of fact, there is a question, and I actually have a comment of my own. First of all, thank you for a great presentation. I would love to hear your comments on this. You know, in my mind, and maybe in the minds of other people, there starts to be a very flimsy boundary between diversion and homeless prevention, and they start to look a lot like one another. If you exclude the paying of rent to a landlord, diversion kind of is prevention. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're looking at broadening our idea of what prevention is. So when we talk about, you know, prevention being stereotypically that idea of I need a 3-day pay or vacate, and then I can pay up to a certain amount if you're in debt this much. But if you're in debt $2,000, you know, that's not what we're looking at. So yeah, absolutely, we're seeing prevention as this the real definition of it, which is like, how do we prevent people from coming in the homeless arena? How do we divert them? How do we prevent them?
By whatever means.
Yeah, exactly. And with the diversion model we use now, you're seeing that broader population as well, whereas with historic prevention programs, you really were seeing, like Jackie was mentioning, those households that really had those 3-day pay or vacates or were currently in a housing unit, but it was at risk of losing their housing. So, but with the diversion model that we use now, it's truly, you're seeing a full gamut of folks that are, they could be doubled up, they could be literally homeless, they could be, in a housing unit. There's just this really broad category of households that we're seeing that we're able to target. So the beauty of it is that we're able to truly be able to assist so many more households in that broader sense and really do that super front-end diversion prevention model of being able to not have these households have to access the homeless arena and having to go through the trauma of being, literally homeless in that sense.
Right. Janelle DiMatteo in Kitsap County, I've unmuted you and you've raised your hand as if you have a question. You can ask the question.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I didn't have a question. I'm not sure how my hand got raised.
Okay. I'll mute you again and I'll unraise your hand. Anybody else in the field have a question for Sharon or Jackie or Rick?
I did see one written in there about, but I don't know if it was to Rick or us, about the definitions of homelessness we can serve with diversion, I think is what they were asking. And it doesn't require anything. It can be any amount of homeless or not homeless at all. You can just look to a resources. So our diversion doesn't restrict any of that, which is wonderful.
So that's the question. I'm sorry, go ahead. No, that's okay, go ahead.
We have a couple different funding sources for diversion. So our city grant is very broad, like Jackie mentioned, but we were just awarded a building changes grant, which is more specific for literally homeless families. So we've been able to expand the services that we offer for diversion. So so we make it work for no matter the composition or what the household identifying, we have a program that can meet their needs.
And no matter what the housing status, I think that was what Shanita was getting to was, is there, can clients be at imminent risk of homelessness or already unsheltered or sheltered homeless? And the answer is yes. Everybody is eligible client for diversion. And the whole, you can't emphasize it too often. The whole point of diversion is to kind of preserve those precious homeless housing resources and save those for the people that have the greatest amount of need and are the most vulnerable. And diversion seeks an often non-monetary solution to a housing crisis.
Exactly.
And Matt says, excellent presentations, everyone. Can the presenters speak more to evaluating the performance of your diversion projects? So I'll open that up to both Rick in Walla Walla as well as Sharon and Jackie.
Sure.
Evaluating performance is the topic.
Yep. Yeah. So we evaluate. So when we look at those rates as well, is the outcome. Excuse me. So we see a successful diversion, and the grant writes it this way as they come into diversions. They're enrolled into a diversion in our HMIS system, and a successful diversion is if they've gotten a service with diversion and do not come back into another homeless enrollment. And then there's kind of time frames on it. So do they come back in a year? Do they come back in 3 years? But of course, we've only had it since January, so we're just looking at the very first few months here.
And then on my side, am I unmuted, Jeff?
You are unmuted, Rick. Go for it.
Perfect. So on my side, with coordinated entry, we kind of have everything in the same shop. So I'll evaluate through HMIS, coordinated entry, everybody that comes in and goes through that coordinated entry assessment. And from that, where they're referred, but part of those is also diversion. So if they come in and they are diverted and we find that alternative route, I'm able to track that along with anybody who's received homeless housing dollars or 3-day pay or vacate assistance with the prevention or everything along those lines. So I'm able to see how many, and the goal is to have the ratio start really tilted towards having a lot more folks going through diversion and trying to get away from some of the prevention side. So that's certainly an ongoing process. That's the ideal, is to see that diversion caseload or the diversion cases go up while the prevention side goes down.
And we also get, this is Sharon's book, and we also get consumer client feedback as well. That's part of our assessment analysis that we do for diversion as well. Is we really ask the households that have participated in the program to give us their feedback on how we can increase our service delivery in a different way, or things we can modify, really, and really look at that and incorporate those strategies into the program that we offer as well.
And I want to ask both presenters to send me their PowerPoint presentations. I'll turn around and send those out to the attendees of the webinar along with the notes that I've taken. And Sharon or Jackie, I wanted to ask you if you could go backwards or forwards on your slide deck. There was that slide. So here's some of that evaluation that Matt was referring to. And I'm sure there's other ways to do evaluations, but I think tracking this kind of information is critical to see how you're doing, and your numbers look pretty good, I would have to say, just off the cuff. So my colleague Emily Burgess has a question. Emily, I've unmuted you.
Hi.
Hi.
So first of all, that was really great, and I've always thought of diversion as like just really skilled, creative case management and advocacy with your client. So my question is, specifically, what kind of training do you provide or require for your staff when they're doing this kind of case management and problem solving? Do you have a specific topics that you train on, or you know?
Yeah, this is Jackie from Spokane. So we saw it as kind of a pilot project. We were training right there with the case managers. So what we saw it as was really this idea of going out and finding the resources, number one, because resources unfortunately change every year based on grant funding and all that kind of stuff. So we had our case managers go out and really look at what are the resources out there before we kind of knew these statistics, right? What do we need real case management on? Is it advocacy? Is it budgeting? Before we were able to get the data, we had to just kind of overview think, what would someone coming in need? And so of course we did the basics. We did, crisis intervention training, trauma-informed care training, those kind of de-escalation techniques to get someone in the mindset of really being creative is a huge piece of it. But then, of course, once we get to the creative side, how do we look at the resources around the community and really have soft transfers there and have somebody to talk to there to really get that coordination of care completely intertwined.
Well, and the amazing part also that we had available to us was our diversion staff, when we transitioned them into that role, were already experts in rapid rehousing and that landlord mitigation, landlord relationship. So it was a huge skill coming in that they already had in their tool belt. So it was this amazing piece of, we know you have this solid piece of housing, history, relationship, advocacy, knowledge about the resources out there, and then how to, like Jackie was saying, how do we expand into these other areas where diversion might touch that we need to increase that skill set on. So we were pretty lucky to be able to already have really knowledgeable staff members on board.
Cool, thank you.
And then, while I love to focus on the success stories, can you talk a little bit about the clients with whom you were not successful? What were the characteristics of those households with whom you were not successful?
We would call it more continuing with case management households.
Yeah, okay. And were those households that wound up going into the homeless housing system?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we, throughout all of the programs that we oversee, each case manager is trained in what we call a progressive engagement model. So that idea of having the lightest touch first and assessing, reassessing the need of the household, and finding out that truly this intervention of diversion being the lowest, lightest touch intervention, working our way up. So really those unsuccessful ones is us saying, this household really needs much more assistance than we can provide in this grant. Let's access a higher intervention, which is wonderful that we have coordinated entry on sites and rapid rehousing so that we really can make that an easy soft transfer as well.
Great. You know, I was thinking back about your statement about making your system a diversion first model. I love that. I think it's a great play on phrases. How long after you began implementing diversion techniques was it that you realized that this really ought to be the first thing you try with everybody? Was that a fairly instantaneous realization, or did it dawn on you later?
You know, it was definitely a training thing of figuring out what is diversion and what does it look like. But then as soon as we realized what we were doing and how successful it was almost immediately after that, because I say this all the time. I can assess all day long. That's fine. I can open up my walk-in hours longer. We can do all that. But what's the point if I don't have a referral to refer out to? If I don't have some kind of case manager to refer out to for this household to be seen immediately as some kind of service, I don't see the point. And that's the point of diversion. So that was immediately my idea of it needs to be diversions first, to not front load coordinated entry and then go to these referrals, but actually have everybody cross-train in diversion. And from that point, we see coordinated entry as the intervention, not diversion. We really see that as the case management rich service that we can provide to anyone. We're not going like deny because you don't see it fit this or that or whatever. It's really that idea, I can provide anybody this service, so let's do that initially, triage that way, and then see coordinated entry and rapid rehousing and everything that comes from there as the next step after that point.
Sure. So I'm curious as to whether or not you've had any experience using diversion techniques with people who were unsheltered homeless.
And so Sharon touched on the second diversion grant that we received from Building Changes, and they have to be unsheltered. So we absolutely have worked with households that are unsheltered and seen successful diversion techniques used with those households. But it's really that idea of, you know, the basic needs of the family aren't met right away. So we need to find something, some kind of resource for them for that, to get that creative mindset going. So we're, of course, reaching out to say, are you safe? Let's make sure that, you know, if you're staying in your car, that we can look into some other resource. Because just like Sharon was saying, sometimes they hadn't even thought about a distant relative or a friend that they thought, actually, I think she might have moved here in the last couple of years. Let's look her up. Let's see if we can find her, and let's see if we can find a safer place for you to go in the immediate need. And then, of course, let's triage all the other resources, like looking at income and getting you connected to all that kind of stuff.
Well, so then that was my next question. If you can truly put diversion to work, housing someone who's unsheltered, does that necessarily imply that they have income? If they didn't have income, I would presume they'd go into the homeless housing system and they'd receive rental assistance for some duration. So to avoid that, does that imply that everyone you're serving has some kind of economic resources?
Oh, actually, and we've seen kind of, well, many different scenarios, but the ones I'm thinking of in my head are for the households that come in with no income that are unsheltered, and we've been able to find a family member or friend that was able to stay with them. That in itself can provide some stabilization. Sure. To triage other resources, to say, you know, these questions that we ask everyone, how long has it been since you've worked? And sometimes it hasn't been that long. It's just because of this big situation that happened that created this round of homelessness is really what they just couldn't picture, couldn't get out of. So once we've met that immediate need of shelter, we can absolutely dive into, well, you know, let's get you into TANF resources that can connect you to Work First resources, Or if you don't want to go that route at all, that's your past experience. Let's update your resume. Let's really look at that. Because when you can meet that immediate need of shelter crisis, it's much more likely that you can think more creatively of how to even divert out of, you know, rapid rehousing and that type of financial assistance to just see if they can figure it out on their own.
Right. This is such a rich conversation, and my sense is that we're, as a state, only really just beginning to scratch the surface of this. I anticipate many more conversations around this topic, and certainly a handful, at least one, conference session at the homelessness conference in May. So I'm not getting other questions from the field. I want to give our attendees one more invitation to raise their hand in their GoToWebinar dashboard or type in a question for me. Otherwise, I'm going to cut everybody loose early. To my presenters, I want to thank you so much. Again, this is a really critical intervention that you all bring to the table. So thanks for sharing your expertise. Any parting words from any of the presenters that you'd like to share with the audience?
It takes a village. Definitely get all of your community partners on board. Sharon Slide hit it perfectly. No one person can do it alone, and we can, as case managers, feel like that sometimes, but really just being that central connection piece to a household, but making sure they're connected with other agencies. Don't reinvent the wheel. If it's already out there, let's connect them to that resource, but then just follow up. How's it going? Make sure nobody's falling through the cracks, because that, of course, can be hard, but get all resources on board. Well,
and that certainly makes the case for staff being kind of the local resource experts.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing I wanted to add too is it's not a scripted program. So, you know, we're very used to getting these grants that say you're going to do this and you're going to do this, and this is how it works, and these are the steps that are attached to it. That's been the beauty of being able to try the diversion program too here in Spokane locally, and that's something we presented to our team too, is that we get to do this. This is our grant, here's our parameters, it's very broad, so we get to create this program. So even though there's, you know, some fear associated with how do you start something new when you don't have any clear, you know, real path of how to do it, that super creative part of that process was huge in having us implement that. So I really encourage everyone to really try it. It really is something that you can make your own, and really, like Jackie mentioned, accessing everything that's out there and really just trying that out and see how it plays out for you.
And I'm guessing that that means that because it's a diversion grant, that really the only allowable expenses under that grant are staff time and salaries. Is that right?
Yeah, and a little bit of flexible funds. So that's where those funds have to spend in or like that. But yes, that's exactly what it covers.
So it's mostly just to get staff in the field making these connections with other resources and kind of getting that learning curve under their belts, as it were.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. Rick, any last words from you?
I kind of want to go with it takes a village. I really thought that kind of captured everything perfectly. Options are always a good thing. Understanding the options in the community are what lead to successful diversion opportunities. So if anything's lacking in terms of knowing what's out there, that's certainly a quick way to start going in the right direction as it relates to diversion.
Yeah, great. So to my presenters, thank you again so much for taking your time and sharing your expertise with us. And I want to make a request one last time that you send me your PowerPoint presentations, and I will turn those around today and get them and my notes out to all the webinar attendees. So with that, I'm going to let everybody go 10 minutes early. And thanks for dropping in, everybody. We'll see you again at the end of November. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.